buggy charged up a steep, muddy dirt embankment. Because the slope was too steep, the vehicle suddenly reared straight up, flipped backward, and ended up stuck right in the middle of the hill. The buggy sped up the muddy dirt slope, but it lost momentum, lurched forward, flipped over, and ended up lying upside down on the slope. The gray-striped buggy was climbing the steep, muddy dirt slope when it lost momentum, reared up, flipped backward, and came back down onto the slope. The white off-road vehicle number 121 accelerated hard up a steep, sandy slope, but just as it reached the top, it lost momentum, reared up, flipped backward, and then tumbled several times all the way back down to the bottom of the hill. The buggy was climbing near the top of a sandy slope when it lost momentum, slid backward, then stood upright and flipped over. The vehicle rolled several times down the hillside and came to a stop upside down. The blue buggy charged up the steep, rocky dirt slope, but when it got very close to the top, it lost momentum, flipped backward, and fell back down to the bottom of the hill. The orange and silver buggy number 29 charged up the steep, sandy slope but lost momentum. The vehicle reared up, flipped backward, rolled, once tore off part of its front bodywork, and then landed back on all four wheels at the bottom of the hill. The bluish-purple buggy hurtled up the rough, rocky slope before hitting a high rock outcrop. The front of the vehicle was thrown up, causing it to flip over, roll, and finally come to rest upside down at the foot of the hill. The yellow and black buggy number 100 charged up the steep, sandy slope but lost momentum, reared up, flipped backward, and ended up upside down at the bottom of the hill. The buggy sped up a rough, rocky slope, but as soon as it reached the rocky outcrop at the top, it lost momentum, lurched forward, flipped over, and rolled down the hillside. The black buggy charged up the rocky slope in the middle of the forest, but it lost momentum, halfway up, reared up, flipped backward, and rolled back down. The maroon buggy charged up the rough, sandy dirt slope. Just after clearing a large dirt ledge, it bounced hard, rolled over at the top of the hill, and then slid back down. The red buggy accelerated powerfully up the sandy slope, but when it reached a bend halfway up, it lost momentum, tilted sharply, and then overturned. The off-road vehicle hurtled up an extremely steep slope, its front end lifted off the ground, and the vehicle flipped over and landed on the ground. The blue buggy was attempting to navigate a narrow, flooded road. When climbing a steep incline, it lost balance, flipped over, and ended up lying upside down in the middle of the road. The black buggy charged up the steep, rocky slope, but near the top, it suddenly reared up, flipped backward, then rolled back down and struck a small tree trunk below. The gray buggy tried to climb the steep dirt bank along the narrow trail, but it suddenly reared up, flipped backward, and ended up upside down in the muddy, water-filled path. The buggy charged up the steep rocky slope, but it suddenly reared up, flipped backward, and rolled down the rocky hillside. The red buggy successfully made it through the narrow, muddy, rock-filled section, but when it charged up the steep dirt bank ahead, the front end suddenly lifted the vehicle, flipped backward, and ended up upside down. The red off-road vehicle number 3 charged up the vertical rock face, but when it reached the top, it lost momentum, flipped backward, rolled once, and fell straight into the water. The red buggy charged hard up the rough dirt slope in the forest, but when it reached the steeper section higher up, it lost momentum, flipped backward, and tumbled several times down to the bottom of the hill. The dark gray steel framed off-road vehicle charged up a steep rocky slope, launching into the air before flipping backward and rolling down to land on its side. The purple buggy charged up the steep rocky slope, but it suddenly reared up, flipped backward, and landed upside down on the hillside before striking a small tree trunk. The dark gray buggy charged up the rough dirt slope in the forest, but when it reached the steep upper section, it lost momentum and flipped backward onto its roof. A gray buggy with red graphics charged hard up the steep rocky dirt slope, but when it reached the taller section near the top, it lost momentum, flipped backward, and ended up upside down on the sandy dirt slope below. The red frame buggy charged up a rough, rocky dirt slope, but when it reached the steeper upper section, it lost momentum, reared up, flipped backward, and then rolled several times all the way down to the bottom of the hill. The silver gray buggy sped through the inflatable gate and followed a rough sandy dirt track, but as it tried to climb a dirt ledge on the turn, the vehicle tilted sharply and flipped onto its roof. The white steel frame buggy charged hard up the dirt slope, but when it reached a steeper section higher up, the vehicle lost balance, hit a tree stump, then flipped backward and tumbled several times all the way down to the bottom of the hill. The off-road vehicle charged up a steep, muddy concrete slope. However, as it neared the summit, it lost momentum, reared up, flipped over backward, and finally landed upside down in a pit below. The black and white buggy launched over a large dirt ridge and kept accelerating up the slope. However, when it slammed into a high dirt wall ahead, the front end shot upward, sending the vehicle into a backward rollover before it tumbled several times back down the hill. The red buggy tried to accelerate hard up a steep, dusty slope, but near the top it lost momentum, reared up, flipped backward, and rolled a few times down the hillside before finally landing back on its wheels. The white steel frame buggy sped through the inflatable gate, launched over a dirt ridge, and then continued over an obstacle made of large tires. After that, it took a turn and accelerated up a steep, rocky dirt slope, but because it lost momentum, it flipped backward and ended up upside down on the slope. The buggy accelerated hard up the steep rock face, but with too much momentum, the wheels struck a tree stump, sending the vehicle into the air. It pitched upward, flipped backward, and crashed back down onto the ground. The black off-road vehicle accelerated up the sheer cliff face. The extreme steepness caused the front end to rear up sharply, flipping the vehicle backward. It completed a full rotation before landing back on all four wheels. The buggy accelerated hard up the rocky dirt trail, but when it reached the rough rocky incline above it, lost momentum, reared. The buggy accelerated hard up the steep rocky dirt slope, but halfway up it lost momentum, reared up, flipped backward, and ended up upside down at the bottom of the hill, kicking up a huge cloud of dust. The black buggy tried to accelerate up a steep trail filled with large rocks. After making it past the rough rocky section and getting close to the top, the vehicle suddenly lost balance and flipped backward. It then rolled onto its side and ended up blocking the trail. The red buggy tried to accelerate up the rough slope covered with large rocks. But when it reached the steeper section, it lost balance, reared up, flipped backward, and kicked up a thick cloud of dust. The black buggy accelerated straight up the steep, rocky dirt slope. Halfway up, the rear end lifted, and the vehicle flipped backward, pausing for a split second in a dangerously upright position before overturning onto its roof and continuing to tumble several times down to the bottom of the hill. The buggy charged up the rough, rocky slope and slammed straight into a large, upright boulder. The impact sent the front end straight up, leaving both front wheels hanging in the air. But luckily, the vehicle stopped just in time and managed to hold its balance in a dangerously close near rollover. Beside the rock face, the buggy accelerated up the steep concrete slope and made it over successfully. However, when it continued onto the sloped dirt area above the vehicle, lost balance, flipped over, and ended up upside down on the... The buggy accelerated up the steep concrete incline, but because the slope was so steep and the vehicle lost momentum, it lost control, flipped backward, and tumbled repeatedly into the deep pit below through a cloud of white dust before finally coming to a stop. The white and orange buggy was driving along the dirt hillside. When it turned and tried to accelerate straight up a short slope, the vehicle lost balance and tipped onto its side on the ground. The black buggy accelerated through the muddy section and then charged up the steep concrete slope. But while trying to hold the top, the vehicle suddenly lost momentum, flipped backward, and ended up upside down below in a thick cloud of white dust. The red buggy accelerated over a small dirt ridge and then charged straight up a steep dirt slope. But when it reached the higher section, it lost momentum and ended up flipping over upside down on the hillside. The buggy accelerated and tried to make it up a steep forest trail filled with large rocks. When the front wheels climbed onto a high boulder, the vehicle lost balance, flipped backward, and ended up upside down on the hillside. The red buggy accelerated hard up a steep, rocky dirt hillside in the forest. But while trying to push its way up the steeper section, it lost momentum, slid backward, and flipped over at the bottom of the slope in a cloud of dust. The white and gray buggy sped along the rough forest trail and then charged straight up a steep rock face. Because the incline was so steep and it slammed into a large rock wall, the vehicle reared up, flipped backward, and ended up upside down on the hillside. The blue buggy accelerated up a dirt slope, but as it crested the hill, the front end shot straight up, the vehicle flipped backward, and it ended up upside down on the hillside with all four wheels in the air. The gray buggy charged up the rocky incline and slammed hard into a tall upright boulder. The heavy impact caused the vehicle to roll over and end up upside down on the slope. The gray buggy sped across the sandy section, made a turn, and then charged straight up the steep rocky slope. When it reached the higher part of the hill, the vehicle launched into the air, flipped once backward, and crashed down at the bottom of the slope in a thick cloud of dust. The buggy accelerated through the dusty section, cleared a dirt ridge, and then charged straight up the steep, rocky slope. But when it reached the higher part of the hill, the vehicle lost balance, flipped backward, and rolled back down the slope. The black buggy accelerated along the trail and then powered straight up a steep dirt embankment. But just before reaching the top, it suddenly lost momentum, flipped backward, and tumbled several times down the slope before dropping straight into the deep trench below. The red buggy accelerated out of the deep trench and up the dirt hillside. However, while trying to climb the slope, it lost momentum, tipped over, and ended up lying in the dirt trench. The gray buggy accelerated over the dirt ridge and launched into the air. When it landed on the two front wheels, the heavy momentum caused the vehicle to flip backward and roll over. The black buggy accelerated up a steep dirt slope, but when it reached the top, it suddenly lost momentum, flipped over, and tumbled several times from the crest down into the valley below. The black buggy accelerated along a muddy, winding road when it lost control. It skidded sideways, flipped over to the right, and came to rest upside down in a puddle of mud. The buggy accelerated up the steep, rocky dirt slope, but when it reached the steeper section, it lost balance, flipped backward, and tumbled several times down the hill. The gray buggy accelerated up a rough dirt slope in the forest, but when it reached the steeper section, the front end lifted, the vehicle flipped backward, and then tumbled down the hill. The black and white checkered buggy accelerated hard up a steep dirt slope. Because the incline was so steep, the vehicle suddenly reared straight up and then flipped over once down the hillside.